Alright, so obviously, I'm like over a month behind on these reviews for the new releases, even though we still got the awards video still going, but it's just been like the shittiest possible month it possibly could have been. But even the elf behind me is like trying to hide the pain unsuccessfully. But now that we could possibly be heading in a good direction, let's not, mope and look down because this movie exists and it is here. So we're going to talk about No Way Home and then we're going to go into Nightmare Alley. So to go into Spider-Man No Way Home, obviously, it's basically the scenario we talked about with Endgame, where I'm just gonna say right now, like, I could try to dance around spoilers and do stuff like that, but I mean, having avoided, the trailers and stuff like that, I don't know what people know and what they don't know going in, because I tried to see as little as possible and hear as little as possible going in. So this whole we're just putting the spoilers like right here because the whole movie is basically a spoiler anyway. Like all of 10 minutes in, there's a really big reveal that I don't think a lot of people knew about. So we're just gonna say right up front, right here, the whole thing's a spoiler. So just to keep that in mind. So yeah, now that's out there, hopefully I can safely go into this and say pretty much anything with free reign. So, just keep that in mind. The whole fucking thing is a spoiler. So, I guess the first thing to talk about in general is what I just said. The fact that the movie even exists at all is really insane, because we've talked before plenty of times, especially recently, about the good and the bad when it comes to fan service, and what is like kind of lazy and desperate, and what really works. And obviously the MCU is one of those things where if you're not in it by now, you're probably not gonna like if you've seen a few and you're like, I'm not really into this. You're never gonna feel this movie to its full extent, and anything else in this vicinity at this point, this deep into it. Um, but the idea, and it might seem like almost too fan servicey, the idea of these universes colliding, but it's really just and because there's the whole debate, starting with the Scorsese thing about are these like would you consider these like movies or cinema or whatever, or just kind of this continuous almost series in itself, but that may not feel particularly cinematic because whatever reasons people have for saying that. But the thing here is that as far as this, like the difficulty that it takes to make a single movie, just by itself completely, and then take into account what all needs to fall into place. Like it's not, it goes beyond Hollywood trying to make a movie and hope the pieces fall into place. For this kind of movie to come together, and for what happens in this movie to come together the way that it does, it's more like the cosmos had to work together, like an outside supernatural force had to work to make everything fall into place that this movie could actually be made. And it comes back to like another huge MCU accomplishment is the funeral scene in Endgame. When you heard the thing where it's like when you see that shot of everybody there, you automatically think, well, there's no way that could have those schedules could have never lined up. That's obviously a spliced together shot, and then you learn that it isn't. And like just that in itself, that accomplishing that shot and getting all that lined up to where it could work out just like that is its own miracle that's almost as miraculous as getting an entire movie made, and that was one shot. And that sort of magic and that sort of, I cannot believe this actually came together this way, and as effectively as it did, to get the emotional response that it earns and has been earning. Not just we've been talking about how massive the MCU already is up to this point, and how it's over 20 movies in the making. So everything that happens in something like Endgame or Infinity War or whatever has been earned over 20 something movies. But now we're not even talking 20 something movies anymore. We're talking nearly 20 something years. And it's wild, and it's really easy to dismiss it and say like, oh, it's a nostalgia thing. People were only crazy about this because they grew up with the movies, all that shit. Because yeah, I remember vividly when Raimi's first movie was coming out, when I was 11, and I had, the action figures. I had the Green Goblin action figure and the one that was just Norman, and then like multiple ones of Spider-Man. There was the MJ one I even had with the red dress, and then there was the whole newspaper the Daily Bugle stand, the glider that actually you press the button and it shoots the pumpkin bombs. All of that, and I was obsessed with those toys when that movie was coming out. And now that I'm like past 30, and we've reached this point and we're coming full circle, that is something that it's like, it really, I like, it's, if you're on the outside looking in, sure, I can see people saying, oh, well, that's cheap. It's just because they know that thing, because they recognize that thing. But it also really cheapens just how well they put this together and what exactly the way they use it to get the emotional responses that they do. Because I was talking to my brother, and he was talking about, this was after I'd seen it, and he said that Tom Holland had said something about, bring tissues with you. And he's like, so is it, a moment like that? And it was like, there's like 10 or 15 moments in this movie that I could refer to. It's like, and it just like just one after the other after keeps hitting you, and that's the crazy thing. That me and my brother do so many of these Marvel videos, and we talk about this so much, but it just still continues to blow the mind. Where it's like, that's what Endgame was, where it was just like moment after moment after moment after moment after moment, and all this stuff that had been earned over this long period of time. And it's like, because Endgame accomplished that so well, it's just like, alright, how do you even move on from Endgame? Like, why is this not the end of the whole thing? And then it was like, then the show started happening. It's like, oh, okay, so we're opening up different things here. And now we've already reached another, another part of this, where it's, the emotion is coming from a place that long predates the first Iron Man movie. It predates the first Iron Man movie by 6 years. And it's and even stuff that people initially kind of went after, which would be Garfield's movies. And before you run away after I say this, just to be clear, it's, hopefully you have seen us talk about this stuff before, or you've been on this channel at some point since 2014, when The Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out. Because, as I just mentioned, the first Raimi movie was a whole big thing in my childhood, and then going all the way up to his third one in 2007. And yeah, that was a massive deal, and that was the thing. That was basically my introduction to Spider-Man itself. I'd maybe seen like 1 or 2 comic books at the time. But taking that into account now, Garfield's first movie came out, and I was just kind of underwhelmed. It's like the Lizard was underwhelming. The whole thing just kind of felt underwhelming. And then the second movie came out, and everybody just started shitting on Garfield's second movie. And it was one of my favorite movies of 2014, and my favorite Spider-Man movie before this one. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was. Very, very controversial. I got so many side eyes back then, and I still kind of do, but I don't know if I've ever felt more validated in regards to an opinion that I've carried for 7 years now, and because I rewatched it recently, I still love that movie, and the fact that it is now, and that's that thing where you're taking stuff that people initially shat on, and you're giving it a whole other new importance that people wouldn't have counted on. Like when we were talking about when Endgame came out, and suddenly Thor: The Dark World was very important in the timeline. And it's crazy how they can actually pull that off. And Iron Man 2 you can throw in there also, where like all this stuff suddenly is much, because they happened, even if they were underwhelming at the time, now have such a greater purpose in this whole picture. That it all comes together, and I would like to think that that's going to come back around, because of how prominent specifically Garfield's second movie was in regards to what's going on in this one. Not to overshadow the fact that the big stuff going into this was the fact. The first big thing was that Alfred Molina was coming back as Doc Ock. And that was one of those things where it's like, when you first heard it, and Molina, like, kind of spilled all the details a little early, it was one of those cases where you're still like, and I know the MCU is, like, the biggest thing in movies right now, but it's just like, that just seems so impossible. I don't know how that's even true. Like, either I'm having a fever dream or somebody's just fucking with us. Like, there's no way Alfred Molina is in this movie as Doc Ock again. And then you start hearing about all the other things they're going to do, and then there was that development in the Loki show at the very end, and it's like, oh, this is... So it's weirdly all coming together in this way that would seem impossible. And then, of course, at the center of this, you have what's essentially the main villain of the movie being... coming all the way full circle back to square one, Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, and that's it's really insane. The thing that does kind of piss me off is that I know we're in the age of the internet, we're in the age of everything is getting out there, but oh my god, there's so much about this movie I wish we hadn't known so long ago. Like, there's like so much of this stuff that we've known for months already. That Alfred Molina was in it, that Jamie Foxx was in it, and all that stuff. How much of a... I mean, it's the movie. It's the whole movie, so I know it's impossible. It would have been impossible to keep that whole thing under wraps. But I mean, even so, just imagine going into this movie thinking you were just going to get, you know, a third Spider-Man movie, and it was going to be like, oh, you know, now Spider-Man has to clear his name because Mysterio, you know, framed him and all that, and now everybody knows who he is, and just make it seem like really simple, and then you walk into this movie completely blindsided by what's in it. How incredible would that have been? Like I said, I know it's impossible in this age now, but I really tried to know as little as possible as going in. Like, I had heard, you know, rumblings, or it was like, oh, if, you know, Doc Ock's in it, then, you know, Green Goblin might be. And then it was like, you know, oh, I think there's somebody saying, like, oh, I think there's a pumpkin bomb in the trailer. Oh, you can see the glider in the back of a poster or something. And in my mind, I was thinking, like, is Willem Dafoe in this? And there was, like, it was really close. It was maybe just about a week and a half ago. Like, a week and a half ago, I didn't know Willem Dafoe was even in this. I wasn't, like, it was, I knew it was a possibility, but I wasn't sure. And then I saw the thumbnail of a YouTube video that had like 5 million views, and it was a villains panel, and it was, surely you've seen this video, Dafoe, Molina, and Jamie Foxx. And I was like, okay, so Willem Dafoe's in the movie. And there's still, I didn't know, I knew that Lizard was in it, but I didn't know if, like, you know, it was actually Rhys Ifans that had actually come back or not, which of course we know now. I am pretty positive I did not know Sandman was in it. Or Thomas Hayden Church for that matter either. In the fact that it could have just been, you know, you could have done Lizard and Sandman without Rhys Ifans and Thomas Hayden Church, but I'm really glad we got what we did. I'm assuming mocap was involved there, so they were actually like in it, which is great. And then there was a lot of talk about, you know, developments now in regards to what we can do with movies now, and it's like, one of the really cool things about Doc Ock, and one of the more praised things about Doc Ock in Raimi's movie was the fact that his tentacles were real and they were, you know, puppetry. But then now he has to do the full CGI thing. At first, you kind of think like, oh, so that's like really achieving it. That's like, because Raimi did something so cool with that, with the practical stuff. Raimi brought the real Raimi qualities to it, the practical stuff. But number one, seeing what, you know, Doc Ock has to do here, and especially with the whole, you know, the nanotechnology taking over, all that stuff, it's clear as kind of like, the puppetry's really great in its own context, but as far as, like, serving this particular, you know, variant of Doc Ock, you kind of have to do, you know, a lot of CGI stuff, so just go that route. But it is so well done that it doesn't really take away. Like, you can, you know, get on the movie's case for being a CGI fest, but, I mean, it looks really good. So it's like, as long as it's, like, really believable and well done, that's great. Where it doesn't quite look like Raimi's first movie when he was flying around in the video game graphics and stuff like that. Stuff that they really amped up and made a lot better in Raimi's second movie. But talking about Raimi's second movie, there is something else going on that I find very interesting about this movie and its approach and what the plot is, that's extremely timely right now. And that is the idea of basically now that they've come into this timeline and this universe, it's like now we have the option to fix their previous ones. And of course, this is a very easy allegory for like the stuff that was criticized about the other movies, like how Spider-Man 3 was hated on a lot, and then Garfield's just whole thing in general. And then the whole debate comes from, do we fix these or not? And it's basically brings up this whole debate of retconning, which is what we're seeing so much of now with stuff like these reboots, like Candyman and Halloween and stuff like that coming out, where everybody's just retconning everything, and it's like it brings up this whole debate of if you can go back and fix it and take things out or make it something better than what it is, like in retrospect. Do you do that, or does it deserve the right to stand on its own as it is in its previous form with no tampering whatsoever, and letting it live its life as it was birthed? And that's I don't know exactly how much they were doing that intentionally, but that's the vibe I was getting the whole time. And I especially loved the whole when it was really starting to set in was the fact that Raimi's Spider-Man 2 is like still considered one of the best superhero movies ever of all time, and it's like when they're talking about going back in and kind of fixing things, it's Doc Ock is the one that's saying, I don't need fixed, like you don't have to fix me, I don't need it. It's like he's basically saying you don't need to fuck with Raimi's Spider-Man 2, it's one of the best superhero movies ever. And like if that's what they were going for, if they were going for kind of the meta angle on that, that's amazing. And even if they were doing it unintentionally, I'm just gonna take it as that. Because that's what viewers can do with stuff like this. That's how art works. Isn't it weird that this actually might be considered that? But there's also the stuff where I got so excited about talking about Raimi's Spider-Man 2, I am starting to lose what the next point was going to be. But I think it's pretty clear that this is going to be all over the place anyway. Because I do think it is very interesting talking about the fact that very early on we're bringing in stuff, because it's like you never would have thought that Raimi's movies would be a part of this MCU. You never thought Mark Webb's movies would be part of this MCU. But now we're going even further, as well as like we're not even stopping there with the fact that Charlie Cox is in this in the first 10 minutes, and I felt like an absolute idiot because it was like the first 10 minutes where Peter gets taken into custody. And there's like multiple moments where they're saying, we're not doing anything without a lawyer. We need to get a lawyer. Peter, get a lawyer. And it just wasn't hitting me. Like it was like, of course. Like it was, like and it seriously wasn't until we finally saw him in the shot where I was like, lawyer, of course. And it's like, and obviously we're not, bringing everything into this. Like, another movie that I quite like that nobody else seems to is Ben Affleck's Daredevil movie. So to see the current Daredevil still in the same room as Jon Favreau, who was the Ben Affleck's Daredevil, there was something there also. Once again, I'm not even sure anymore what's intentional. Like, there's so much crossing over. There's so many people involved in so many different things and universes coming in. I don't even know what's intentional by them anymore. But, like, if they're doing stuff on purpose that's working extremely well and is so well executed, while also doing things totally by accident, it's just the way it's all coming together just makes more and more sense to where happy accidents will happen also. And that's, yeah, so as far as, like, I'm not even sure how much I've talked about the movie itself and what it handles. The thing I was going to bring up where I lost my train of thought was that idea of it being sort of feeling like a meta sort of thing about retconning. There are a lot of other meta things in here that I don't know if I'm completely into, and that's the clear use of memes. Like, I can get, like, one or two memes maybe being a little bit referenced here, but I get that, like, so much, comes out of Raimi's movies, especially, as far as memes go. Like, that's, like, if we're talking movie-based fan service, I can get behind it, but, like, meme-based fan service, I don't completely know. Maybe I'm a little too old for it or something, or too old to, like, really appreciate it, I guess. Like I remember thinking it was really funny when I'm something of a scientist myself started becoming a meme. Like whenever I would see that start to pop up, it was really funny, and I loved like of all the lines, of course, because it's those moments where you've seen those movies so many times, you know those lines just in their regular context, and to start seeing them in other context, it's hilarious for sure. I don't know about like when he actually says it in the movie. That's just one of them. It was like, I mean, they did put it in a context. He didn't just say it randomly, but I mean, still, it was like, I don't know. But I don't think it's like with how well these movies are already put together and written. It feels pretty unnecessarily desperate to resort to that, especially as many times as this does. But but at the same time, this is clearly a movie that is absolutely in love with its fans. And the fact that that's the opposite of looking down on people with how cynical everything else is in the world. We'll take it. So it's like we'll embrace the love that this movie is sending out. Um, like I said, there's so much because that's the thing too. When you talk about it being so CGI heavy, is people will immediately jump on that and say CGI heavy movies are soulless or emotionless and stuff like that. And if there's one thing that you cannot call this, it would be emotionless. There's so much in it. And like I said, whether you're coming from, knowing all the stuff that came before or what, but just the whole surreal quality of it. Like, I feel like most of the people that watch this movie and then go home at night, it's like I feel like we as a group will be afraid to wake up the next morning because there will be a possibility this was a dream. A really, really cool, very long dream. Very, very vivid, very realistic. And it's crazy that all of this comes together. To see Tom Holland and Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire just doing lab work together, and this just shuffling around, accidentally bumping into each other. Um, Ned calling out for Peter Parker, and they all three respond. And then all these talks, the stuff where you can definitely tell it's going into the meta stuff, where like Andrew Garfield almost kind of like he was so like put off by the experience, like he found it like I think his actual words were it was a heartbreaking experience. And he was saying this right after his second movie came out, which was really breaking my heart because I was like no, Garfield, hear me. We people who love that movie are out here. We're very, very few, but we're out here. And so to see Tobey Maguire give Andrew Garfield a pep talk and say, you are an awesome Spider-Man, and to have like his arm around him, and it's like this goes in and out of movies and also kind of real life, and you can see the emotion, because there's another thing here when you think about kind of real life bleeding in, and it's one of those things where you don't know if it's intentional or not, and I was finding it really interesting, the stuff, like, first off, as a huge fan of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, all of the, Gwen symbolism was like I had heard about that shot in the trailer. Even though I didn't watch the trailers, I had heard about that shot in the trailer. People were saying, like, oh, there's a shot of, Kirsten Dunst falling in the first movie that's very similar to this shot of Emma Stone falling to her death in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And then there is a shot in No Way Home's trailer, apparently, of Zendaya falling, and it's a very similar shot. And when I had heard that shot of Zendaya existed, that her MJ existed, my immediate first thought was, how profound and emotional would it be if Andrew Garfield was the one that saved her and righted the wrong of Gwen's death, and had a redemption arc with it. And then I immediately thought, well, no, first of all, people are shitting on Andrew Garfield's movies. They wouldn't want to draw that much attention to how emotionally involving that moment in Amazing Spider-Man 2 was. And, they wouldn't want to take that away from Tom Holland because that's Tom Holland's movie. But the movie is so willing to split it up to where everybody has their moments, everybody has their importance. And it's like they even joke how it's like, who's Spider-Man 1 and number 2, and like Garfield just kind of surrenders to being number 3. And it's like, and once again, it's so, like, even though he's playing along and it's great and he gets his moments like that, it's still heartbreaking to see him as almost like the rejected one. And it's like the whole point of the movie is to take that back and to show that he's not a rejected one. It's like, even when, a lot of people thought that his, Peter Parker wasn't very Peter Parker-esque. Like he was like too cool for it. I think that was the criticism or something. Yeah, he has like a cooler quality, I guess, but he's still dorky as fuck, which they definitely play with in this, which is what you want. But still, to see them as all like practically equals now, was something that really felt like it felt necessary. You could say this was just fan service. You could say like, oh yeah, they're doing this together, or like it'll be a big cash grab because obviously this movie is gonna already made like godly amounts of money before it's even come out. But it also feels necessary, which is, and I know there's the whole thing where it's like technically no movie's necessary, but it's, as far as like taking all of these generations of Spider-Man into account, it does. And it feels even weird to say generations because Garfield's last and Holland's first were only 3 years apart. And how it was a joke in itself that it was being rebooted so quickly, and I don't think that helped the reputation of the Mark Webb movies either. But yeah, so to bring them forward like that and to have that moment where Garfield is the one that saves Zendaya and bringing that whole thing around, and having all of the previous Spider-Man interact with their previous villains, and the whole thing about how they bring up Jamie Foxx has literally had like Max's character has had a makeover, and that and the whole like going like embracing that. There is the moment where the score kicks in when Electro like kind of wakes up, and it's that score when he was like kind of tearing apart the city in that really great scene in the second movie. But it was the whole thing of like where they were doing some Max retcon. It felt like, even though they were drawing attention to it, so technically it's not, but it also technically is. It's complicated, like most of the things going on here. But talking about the approach to the villains though, and what exactly the idea is about the idea of curing them before they go back. And I was the moment that I knew, I mean the movie was just working for me. Like, you even have the earlier scenes before anything has really happened, and it's just about them getting into MIT and getting accepted, and they make you care about that before anything even really, huge happens. Because it's the whole reason he goes to Doctor Strange and this whole thing gets set off. But the idea, when it really, just really had me, though, when I was like, this is exactly what I want out of this. It was that moment when it was like, okay, we can start up the curing thing, and it's like, yeah, it makes sense, for Doc Ock and Lizard and Sandman, because their arcs in their own movies were all ready to come full circle and come back to good, just before they're either killed or taken away. But even Norman, in like the last few seconds before his death, goes back to Norman in Raimi's first movie. Max never got the full circle arc because he died too quickly, but he always had a tragic arc. So the idea of this being the case of, like the whole point is like, usually the idea is they're trying to do their plan and then the plan fails, and then at the last minute they have a redemptive moment that sort of comes to them leading up to it. So the idea to just make them have that moment and that be the solution, because you're bringing who they once were back out, so it was already there, is great. And then you have those where it's like, that's simple enough, and like the fact that Doc Ock's the first one to change back, and it's like, yeah, that makes sense because that was already his arc anyway, was to come back around just before he was done. And for Goblin and Electro to say no. And then we have our main antagonists, that's when I was really, when I knew that Goblin was basically going to be the main villain of the movie, I cannot express how both pleased and incredibly excited I was for the rest of the movie. And once again, this is before Maguire and Garfield are even here. And another thing that I really love also about this, you can tell how much care went into it. And this is another thing that takes it that big step beyond just fan service and nothing else. And that's the fact that when you hear, like, there was the whole thing leading up to it. Like, it was, like, for a while it was like, yes, Alfred Molina's in the movie. Is Jamie Foxx in the movie? I don't know. Oh, yes, Jamie Foxx is for sure in the movie. Is Willem Dafoe in it, though? And it's like, yeah, Willem Dafoe's in it, okay. They never gave you the answer 100% on Garfield and Maguire leading up to it. That I know for sure. And with Garfield having Eyes of Tammy Faye and Tick Tick Boom coming out and just being bombarded and bombarded, it's like a normal person would crack. But clearly Garfield is a consummate professional with this. And it helped a lot that he had a movie as amazing as Tick Tick Boom to kind of take the attention off a little bit, but the question was always there. Are you in it? Is Toby in it? And assume, like, you go in and it's like, well, they've built it up so much now that they have to be. I think it was Jimmy Kimmel that said, like, at the rate it was going, if they weren't in the movie, people might have turned on the MCU if they weren't in it after all that build-up. So the easy thing, and what probably any other movie would have done, is they'd show up at the very end. They'd show up in, like, the last 2 minutes, save the day, and then be gone. And it would literally just be they could just walk into a soundstage by themselves, shoot their own thing, and then go home with their money, and then they just splice it together in post. When there was like an hour left of the movie, when Maguire and Garfield came in, and the people, I don't know that I've been going to movies my entire life. Many, like, especially we used to do the opening night thing when I was a kid. Now I'm doing the kind of opening morning thing to kind of avoid crowds, but didn't matter. I was there at 10 o'clock this morning, nearly full. The biggest auditorium we have, nearly full, and it had screamers in it. This is kind of, I know some people have problems with that. I don't really. I think it's because I don't hear it as much in, like, this area, especially since I usually go in the mornings. I don't mind it. I didn't mind it today either. But there were definitely screamers, and it makes you feel like this part of this shared experience, which is what these movies do so well. You can go, online and see all those, where people record the sound of the audience when, like, Cap gets the hammer in Endgame and stuff like that. And it's like seeing Garfield and Maguire seem to even be surpassing that as far as the the vibration scale of the reactions that come out of this, and that's really great. I just kind of love that in general. Even if I'm not a fan of crowds, the sort of shared experience thing. It's a complicated relationship, but it's there, and that's. Yeah, and I feel like, once again though, I feel like I've barely talked about the movie itself. This is just what the movie accomplishes merely for existing and accomplishing its goal of giving people what they were hoping they would get. Because that's the thing also, is there's a fine line there between giving people what they want and making something super predictable. And it's like, because you want to give the people what they want, but you also got to you got to take that, you got to give them what they want, and then you got to take that next step, or the next multiple steps. And that's what, like, still give them something they're fully prepared for, but also not prepared for at all. Once you find that middle place, is where you kind of go beyond fan service, and where you go beyond, audiences just sort of getting what they want and then going home, and then forgetting that your movie exists because they got everything they want. They got exactly what they expected. So to take this to those further steps, I think, is where the emotion comes. That's the part that you gotta blindside people with, is the emotion part of it. And so it's like, you can have people say, like, hey, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland are all just interacting together. Isn't that funny? Isn't that great? They joke around a little bit. But, like, to have those moments where Garfield gets the pep talk, where you assure him that he did his job and he did it well, despite what you hear. And like I said, once again, you could, get cynical and tell people they're backpedaling because he was, in a movie that's universally loved now. But, like I said, like I was talking about with, Thor: The Dark World and Endgame, where it's like, when you have another project that comes along and suddenly gives something previously more importance than it had, and you've got a fuller picture of something to go on, that's just fine. Like, another thing I think of is how much emotion is added to the first Men in Black movie when you know the end of Men in Black 3. And it's like having a full picture from a movie that didn't exist at the time can still make your movie even more powerful than it already is. Because obviously the first Men in Black is already amazing anyway. And the same thing, in my opinion, my very small opinion, of Garfield's second movie being like, I'm gonna assume that people are on track with saying this is like, I'm assuming 90% of people are gonna say this is the best Spider-Man movie ever now. When previously people might have said Raimi's second movie, or maybe depending on how strong Holland's base was, or base is, depending on his two movies. But yeah, so that's, and the fact that you have those people, you have the people that Toby is their guy. You have the people where Garfield is their guy. That's kind of where I stand, even though Toby was my first one. And then you got the New Holland people, and the fact that you can have all of these people come together, that have these different ones. Because before this movie, those people might have been warring a little bit, where it's like, you could say, like, I could say, I mean, I really love Toby, I grew up with Toby, but, I think Garfield's my guy, and Toby people would say, oh my god, go fuck yourself, you are a fucking idiot. But now, and, Holland's people might say the same thing about either one of these, but it's like, now that they've all had this shared moment, and it's all kind of like, we see the three Spider-Men on equal ground now. It's like unifying of these fan bases in a way, that's really incredible. And it would not have worked that way if they botched this. Like, yeah, you can say it's easy to do that, just bring everything together, to the people what they want, but you gotta stick the landing, and that is so much harder than it sounds. You can just say, hey, we're gonna do this thing, and sometimes that'll work. If your audience is dumb enough, it will work. But but when you execute it this well, to where everybody can look back and say, like, I want to watch Garfield's movies again, or I can't wait to watch Toby's movies again. And that's, yeah, now people, like, the idea of people potentially wanting, like, a fourth Raimi movie or a third Mark Webb movie, and it's, yeah, it's kind of a really beautiful thing. And yeah, so that's the kind of general thing. I suppose I could stop here, but I mean, I wrote other things down. I guess I could just throw out there really quickly. I love what they're doing with Jameson, of course. I love the idea of because also talking about things kind of bleeding in, when you talk about, like, retconning being an actual thing that we're seeing a lot in these movies. Also bringing in some more serious real life stuff, like how prominent and dangerous misinformation is, and how it's fucking everywhere, and how it's very clear who this new Jameson is supposed to be. And if you didn't get the point, the little supplements thing, yeah, it's probably heavy-handed, but it's fucking hilarious. So, and to show, like, the dangers of, like, to see, Jameson on TV saying these things, that you just know are false. Like, it's so abundantly clear he's just completely anti-facts in general, and to see what it's doing to Peter's life and everything around him, and it's in the fact that they'll just go along with, you see the stuff like, Thanos was right and Mysterio was right and stuff like that, so that, and it's, like I said, very heavy-handed, but it's, yeah, and I love the fact also that it's like, you could say they really dove headfirst into that and completely made him that character, but yet he still also feels so much like the same character that he was in Raimi's movies, which is hilarious as well. And talking about another thing of things bleeding into real life, I was going to talk about this more with the Garfield catching MJ thing, and that is, and once again, this may not be on purpose, and I don't know where Garfield's coming from, because he's amazing, he's an incredible actor, and could, bring emotions out from anywhere. But another vibe I was really getting that's very interesting when you look at the events that have transpired now in real life, as well as the movies, the idea that the romance between current Peter and MJ feels so potent, especially now that we know that Tom Holland and Zendaya are a couple in real life. much like Garfield and Stone were at the time. And so we see them, and you see this love that is prominent right here and right now, and it's in the moment. And then you talk, and it's real life as well. And then you see Garfield talking about Gwen, and of course in the movie he's talking about Gwen having died and not having been able to save her. But it's like, how much of where Garfield's performance is also coming from that relationship that didn't work, and that relationship that eventually ended. Surely they're both, happy in their separate places now, but it's like there's got to be that place of like, what could have been in any relationship that's great and then ultimately fails. And that whole thing, like, there's so many. Once again, maybe I'm taking this to too many levels, but I mean that's and the idea, and it's almost like you can almost see Garfield talking to Holland about, like, if follow the love with Zendaya, not just MJ. So that's a whole other layer of emotion that's there that may or may not be intentional. I think Holland and Zendaya only just recently confirmed their relationship, so we don't even know how long that's even been going on for sure. But like, it could have been at the time of this. I have no idea. But once again, that's another one of those things where I don't know if that was the point at all, but I'm just gonna kind of take it anyway and kind of make it part of the part of the experience of the whole movie anyway. So yeah, and then of course, getting to the big death, that was something I did not see coming. But once again, the way everything comes together and how Peter never had his Uncle Ben moment, and that's hilarious. It's amazing that one of the things that was really praised about Homecoming was that we didn't get the origin story over again. Everybody's talking about, and when you go to DC and you see the Waynes die over and over and over and over again, and everybody's like, oh, thank Christ, we did not have to see the whole Uncle Ben thing again. It's just like, oh, by the way, this happened, and, now I'm here. And the spider bite, all that, but now we're here. So we never got to see Peter's transformation, so it's almost like a big twist is that this whole trilogy was leading to that transformation that we typically saw at the beginning of the Maguire story or the Garfield story. And so he finally does get his Uncle Ben, and they really ram that home with the line as well. The Spider-Man line. So it's like we're only just now seeing Peter's origin, and it's like that it's just now dawning on, after everything they've accomplished already, and then to get us to this point, and how it comes together so beautifully is wild. And it's like the way this series has been handling loss of characters, particularly with Peter and Happy, how they both lost Tony and now they've both lost May, it's crazy how heavy this can feel, for sure. And you can, like, obviously people on the outside can just see it as another CGI fest. Superhero movie that doesn't matter, has no emotion whatsoever, or whatever that is. But I mean, once you're in it, you're in it, and it's heavy stuff. So. And I've said before where I was talking about, like, how I don't want Emily Blunt to be Sue Storm like everybody else does, because I feel like her talents could be served elsewhere, where that's a part that wouldn't be challenging enough for her. She has much more range and can do much more things without getting caught up in an MCU contract and potentially losing a lot of roles where she could really stretch herself more. But there are certain roles and there are certain things in this universe where it does take somebody that's a real actor that can go to these places. That's more than just, the characters that kind of go from movie to movie. And we've been really hitting these kind of post Endgame and forward. And when they hit, they really do hit. So there is that. So I don't really know what else there is. And I guess, we get to our ending. This very sort of bittersweet thing where it does feel like it's so interesting to me. It feels like the whole thing was just a jumping off point we've been leading to this whole time. When we thought our jumping off point would have been Homecoming or Civil War even. But the fact that we could potentially just be getting started. I had heard that as of right now, there's not, like, actual active plans for Holland to go, like, 3 more times, but I mean, it's, but the fact that it's there and they've got it completely set up, and it doesn't even feel like sequel bait. It feels like a conclusion and a beginning equally. which is insane. And that's wild. It just comes back to the very first point we were making. It's so insane this movie exists, that it's done as well as it does, and everything came together for it to come out the way that it did. It's You just kind of have to be in awe of it, and I don't really know what else I can really say. So, so that's what that is, I suppose. So, doing this a little differently today, I actually, as you're hearing this, I have not seen Nightmare Alley yet. I'm going to turn the camera off, go to Nightmare Alley, and then just come right back here. But all you're going to see is a cut, and that whole thing will have happened in between. So, I guess now I can go into Nightmare Alley. So on Nightmare Alley, of course, this is Guillermo del Toro's new one, where it's him kind of straying away from the monsters or the supernatural a little bit, in the traditional sense of his other movies, and kind of going into more of a noirish thing, but the monster symbolism is still in there. It's it's one of those cases, many of which we've been seeing lately, where it is an adaptation of a novel that's probably going to get mistaken a lot for a direct remake, because this novel was obviously also a movie in 1947 with Tyrone Power. So, which this has not a shitload in common with, but it's very much a Del Toro movie, of course. And what I do really like about this movie, that's apparent pretty quickly, is that you hear about, like, people that have, like, an old soul, that they call it, and I kind of feel like this is the movie equivalent of that, where it's got, like, the soul of an old movie despite being in 2021, and not just, you know, the fact that it's a movie that was also done in 1947, but it feels like it could come from, like, the 30s or 40s. I feel like it has a lot of freaks in it too. Todd Browning's Freaks. I kind of kept coming back to me throughout it. Or if you want to go to Browning's The Unknown, which was in the 20s. That whole thing, like these whole carnival set things that have this sort of horror tone, that are kind of much more about the. We talked about this when we did our top 5 horror movies, and I talked about Freaks, which was on my list, and that whole thing of how the, in quotes, freaks of the story were much more human than the humans, and the humans were the monsters, if you will. And that's the kind of thing, though, where it's a bit of an obvious direction to go for a movie in 2021, because Del Toro has already kind of played with this already, the whole idea of the monsters in the story being the more human characters. Like his last movie before this obviously was The Shape of Water, and through Michael Shannon's character we got that pretty blatantly. Not that blatant is bad, but it's a very clear, like, it's not exactly subtle symbolism, but there are definitely nuances throughout this movie, because the movie is incredibly downplayed just kind of in general anyway. Much more slow burn than I was anticipating, even knowing the story going in. I almost feel like you can, even if you know the whole story going in, you can tell how slow burn it is, because everything kind of feels deliberately drawn out. Which, once again, you can tell is for the effect. Del Toro clearly knows what he's doing, so you feel like you're in good hands, and you have confidence in the filmmaker when you go into a movie like this. And of course you've got the production levels that he is always able to reach, especially with his production designer and his cinematographer. A lot of snow. I've always talked about how I just love the way snow looks on screen, and this is no exception. And that's all great. And of course we've got a massive cast here, starting with Bradley Cooper, who of course is going to be the center of this, in this sort of, I would say, morally ambiguous, but what's really interesting is they show us right away in his opening scene that he is coming from, like, a dark place. Like, you get, like, when you see a movie like this, particularly like a noir movie or something, and you see a character just kind of walk in clearly from, like, another world into a new one, it kind of leads a lot of questions for the audience about, like, where does this guy come from? Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Or is he somewhere in between or whatever? And, like, the opening scene, the very first time we see Cooper and what it is that he is doing immediately tells us, okay, this guy's coming from a really, really dark place. And, like, even if there's a reasonable explanation to what's going on, it's just still got sinister written all over it. Like, something has gone horribly wrong in this dude's life, and now he's bringing whatever darkness that is into the next place he's going to be, which is this carnival. Where he meets Rooney Mara and Toni Collette and Dave Strathairn and Ron Perlman and just about any other actor under the sun you can think of eventually shows up here. But and Willem Dafoe, who's kind of running the thing as the Barker of sorts. And it's these early interactions that can really draw you. And even if it's like super slow burn, it feels like things are moving like very, very sluggishly. There's always an actor there to kind of bring a lot of life into it. So I guess now would be a good time to talk about how I feel about Bradley Cooper in this part, where it's an amazing part, and I could see Cooper being great in it, like just kind of in general. But as far as what's actually in the movie and the execution and what we see on screen, I kept feeling like there was a sort of magnetism missing, for me anyway, where it's like you can tell how drawn in by this character you're supposed to be, but I just don't think I was there, and I kept thinking if it was another casting choice, maybe, because there was this whole confusion about DiCaprio being up for a couple of things, all at the same time, like, you know, the new Scorsese and Don't Look Up and this and Licorice Pizza. And apparently the Licorice Pizza thing was debunked, and DiCaprio was never approached for that, according to Paul Thomas Anderson. But the last I heard, DiCaprio was up for this before he took Don't Look Up, or the Scorsese movie, whichever one, I don't know, instead. And that's the kind of magnetism I could see really drawing us more into this thing. And I can see people taking to Cooper, but there's most of the magnetism that does come from Cooper, I feel like, is much more of, like, you know, directorial choices or writing choices, like, the whole idea of when he's talking, there's an extended scene where he's talking to Dave Strathairn and kind of learning some of the magic behind what he does in the sleight of hand and stuff like that, and he's wearing, like, this fake bow tie, and then it's like, he eventually takes that off, and when he takes it off, it's like, it's almost like you can see his entire demeanor change, and the whole, you know, symbolism as far as him disguising himself. Like I said, not incredibly nuanced a lot of the time. There's still some subtleties in this movie, but there's also stuff that's kind of right in your face. But at the same time, Del Toro's the kind of showy director to where, once again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're letting the visuals tell the story almost by themselves, because there's quite a bit of a chunk of time here, if I remember correctly, before Cooper even has a line, where he meets Willem Dafoe, and then he's introduced to, you know, some of the attractions, and then there's a whole sequence where one of them gets away and they have to go find him in the rain, and it's this sort of, like, everything has this really sort of gloominess to it, but not like in this sort of draining way, but in like this really intriguing, almost going down a rabbit hole kind of way, that it maintains for a while. Like I said, it's mostly in, like, you know, the visuals and the visual storytelling doing the job for everything else. But it is one of those cases where it's much more interesting to see, like, to anticipate which character you're going to meet next, or in a sense, which actor is going to come into the story next. Because Willem Dafoe holds us for a while, and then you can kind of sense, like, okay, this is kind of taking its time, and I'm okay with that. And then we get more of what Toni Collette and Dave Strathairn have going on, especially the relationship between Strathairn and Cooper's characters, and how he's kind of showing him all this stuff, and that connection that's a bit more revealed throughout, that Cooper has to people like Strathairn's character. is intriguing enough, but you kind of always get to that point of where you eventually say, or at least for me, was like, okay, I'm kind of ready for the next thing. And if even if it's, taking its time intentionally, it's still like you never want to quite reach that moment where you have time to say, okay, I'm ready for the next thing. It should be like like it should be in tune with the audience, where it's like just before the audience can say, okay, I'm ready for the next thing, it should be starting the next thing. But there is those spaces in between where you're just kind of waiting for him to go from one character to the next, or one sequence to the next, until there's a 2-year time jump. And then we get more into the Cate Blanchett side of the story. And before we go into that, let's go back to Willem Dafoe, who I feel like holds the life of the movie for a little while he's here. Because what's really fun about his character, not only just the commitment that Willem Dafoe constantly has, we just talked about in the last movie, how committed Willem Dafoe gets to a role, especially if he really, really wants it or loves being in it. But speaking of loving being in your role, what's really fun about this character, Clem, is that he's that carnival barker of sorts, which you get, that image in your head of what that would be, especially in like a 1930s/40s setting. But the fact that this is a character that's on even when he's not doing his job, like when he's just having a normal conversation, he's still extremely, he's got that showmanship, and it's like, to give Willem Dafoe this part is obviously a stroke of genius. There's just little things in there that are amazing too. That almost feel like completely, almost unscripted. I'm sure they were, but almost unscripted in a way where it's like he has this very crucial monologue over like lunch or dinner with Cooper, and he's giving this monologue, and while he's giving this monologue, he just starts like taking and eating food off of Cooper's plate without, I don't even know if Cooper realizes this is happening. And little details like that just stand out in this really great way. And like I said, that's where a lot of the light, like I could feel a sort of lightning bolt of energy coming back into this movie every time Willem Dafoe would reappear. But that's the kind of disappointing thing, is I feel like that electricity should be there constantly. Like, even a slow burn movie, or a movie that's like really, really deliberately paced, can still have electricity throughout it, without having to necessarily be showy or loud or anything. It can still be at that pace, but just for whatever reason, I wasn't having that drawn-in feeling. Like, it's that kind of thing where you can recognize like the production values and how well made it is. But there's just like that one thing sort of missing. As it went on, I was trying to figure out if it needed more suspense, maybe. But I don't know if that'd be completely necessary because of the way we kind of gradually get to that point to where it becomes much more of a suspenseful story. And if you were to do that in any other places here in the early scenes, it'd probably be pretty forced. So I don't really know. Like, I'm sure it could easily have been cut down, because it's like 2.5 hours. And like I said, the story is, smooth enough as it is. But like I said, it leaves those open spaces where it's like you're just kind of waiting for it to turn the next corner. So we eventually do get to Cate Blanchett, who's got this whole femme fatale thing going on. And once again, this is another case where I felt like I should have really been into this and really loving this, where it's the idea of Del Toro taking this sort of classic noir approach and having these noir tropes in it. And that's that thing where, like, there's a negative connotation with the word trope. But that's like when you go into a certain type of movie, there's some things that you want to be in there, otherwise they wouldn't really be that thing. So it's like when you go into a noir-esque thing, naturally you're gonna hope there's like a femme fatale character in there or whatever. But I'm also kind of in that mindset of like, I know it's like, it's a characteristic of many of some of the greatest movies of like the 40s, but 40s specifically, going into the 50s, but the whole femme fatale thing has never quite been something that's always drawn me in, because it's like, it's such a familiar trope. If you've seen one femme fatale, you've pretty much seen all of them. It's like the kind of the same setup. They all kind of have the same demeanor, the same twists and turns in their arc, and Kate Blanchett doing that is great. But I'm kind of, well, I know most of the world believes that Kate Blanchett walks on water. I half believe that Kate Blanchett walks on water. There are many parts in her career where it's some of the best stuff you will ever see in your life as far as acting goes, and I completely and fully agree with that. But then there's like Carol Kate Blanchett or Blue Jasmine Kate Blanchett, where you can really see the acting. Like you can really see Kate Blanchett, the actress, doing her best to act as big as she can. And while obviously Blue Jasmine and Carol are like two of her most acclaimed performances, those are ones that never quite worked for me for that reason. You can see all the wheels turning and all the ticks and stuff like that. And this more or less feels like I guess this performance is kind of a middle ground of that. The stuff that she does very well that makes her disappear, and the stuff where you can really see the acting. You can really see the I'm supposed to be the classic femme fatale, and that's everything that you expect it to be, which kind of leaves a lot to be desired as the story goes on, and the story commits more and more to her character and the prominence of her character. So that was only going so far. So it's like when you know the story, it's one thing for it's like okay now we just wait for the next turn, but then you've got like the Richard Jenkins character, and it's like if you know the story and you feel like it's getting dragged out a little bit too much, probably you're going to be thinking, okay, now I'm just kind of waiting for Richard Jenkins to get here because that's when the story's going to really start to take off. And it takes a long time. Like by the time we finally see Richard Jenkins show up, I love they do a little build up to him when we know he's coming, which I did really love. But then when he actually like shows his face on screen, I immediately had the thought of, okay, I know what all the story has left, but I kind of feel like it should be ending right about now, time wise. But yeah. So and then it goes into it's the third act is wild, which is good. Because like I said, there is a burst of I can appreciate the deliberate pacing, but there are bursts of energy that it could have had throughout, and you can really see that when the third act comes, and you're like, yeah, there was some sort of. I mean, this is a nice payoff, but it was a long trip to get here. um, and obviously, with it being a Del Toro movie, we're going to have some pretty gruesomely executed gore, which, while we did start off with that very dark opening scene, the gore, to the extent that it goes in the third act, to me felt pretty out of place, like pretty abrupt and sudden. And maybe that's the point, is that it's that jarring because of that. But I just thought it was kind of out of place, like not necessarily the good kind of jarring. As far as gore goes, well executed, sure. But as far as what the story was doing, it kind of feels a little bit from out of nowhere. Despite dealing with the macabre throughout, it gets pretty wild, which is both good and maybe could have been a tad toned down also. But it's just a whole lot of mixed feelings coming from this, the whole movie really. But I don't know if it might help, if I saw it again and I could really, now that I really have a vibe of the pacing that it was going for. But a lot of the time it just kind of felt like I wasn't quite, and I'm still wondering how much of that is the casting of Cooper, and if there is an actor with like a lot more magnetism that could have been a much more of a, like I wouldn't have had to strain to get really kind of involved in it, because I felt like I was kind of straining to feel involved the whole time. And like I said, for a story that I already know from two different other sources, having trouble getting into it is an odd place to be in when you know a story already from beginning to end. It's I don't know, but like I said, on a technical, and this probably sounds like a cop out, but it's a Del Toro movie, so obviously, on a technical level, it's hard to dislike in any way. So it's like there is always going to be something there, but whether it be like a supporting performance or just the production values in general, production design, cinematography, sound is very well used as well. But it's like I said, it's a very very long trip for a payoff that we already know is coming. Like, even if you don't know the book or the previous movie, the symbolism is so apparent that you know where it's going. Like I said, even though they do that, visually too, like there's a lot of like spirals and stuff like that. I'm all for telling your story through your visuals, but like I said, it can only go so far when what the story is and what the symbolism is being so obvious. It's yeah, it to me, I do feel underwhelmed, but like I said, something this slow burn, maybe it will just take a second viewing. I don't know, but I guess we'll see, and I guess we'll probably be talking more about it as the award stuff continues to go on, depending on what it does. But we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, I can appreciate this movie for sure. I was certainly glad to see it, especially in a theater. But I'm not like totally crazy about it, which is really disappointing. Because I was especially really excited for Del Toro to go down this path, to where it's obviously it's definitely got some themes that he's explored before, but in like kind of a style or like a genre that he hasn't really fully dove into before. But yeah, I was kind of left wanting a lot more out of it. So that's pretty much where I stand on that. So those are the ones from this weekend. Now we're gonna go back a few weekends. Like I don't know why I still haven't talked about West Side Story or Belfast or The Power of the Dog. I've already seen The Power of the Dog 3 times now, and I haven't even talked about it on here yet. So I need to do that. Mass, Lamb, Passing, The Humans, all this stuff. I've got all the notes right here. I've just got to talk about them. So that's what we're going to be doing here for a while. Spencer, of course. Yeah, so that's what we're going to be doing over the next few videos as we get caught back up. In time for all this, award stuff coming and the end of the year stuff, like the best movies of the year and the worst movies of the year. We're going to talk about that too, which should be fun. So, yeah, that's what we're going to be doing for now. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.